All right, well said. Sir, I believe you had a question. You want to stand up, please, to ask your question, and if everybody would just be real quiet when that question is asked so the candidates can hear it. Thank you.
We've got a quick comment and then a question with a very short answer. I hope we get enough press coverage to raise some Occupy protesters at the next floor, because those folks are making fools of themselves, and that gets some real press for us. The question I have is, if each of you would tell us who in the current House of Representatives you consider yourself most comparable to in your position.
Ethan, go ahead.
I'd say the two members of Congress who I most admire are our neighboring Congressman, Patrick McHenry, and Congressman Paul Ryan, who's the chair of the Budget Committee. These are two guys who I have great admiration for, and I appreciate their policies. I appreciate how resolutely they stand up for what they believe in and how they're advancing the conservative cause in Washington. And I appreciate that they do it in a way that's actually leading to progress. And I think that we need more of that. I would also point out one of the things that I like about them and why I view them as a model for myself is both of them were elected at about my age. And I see them as a great model for how folks like myself can go up to Washington, put my head down and work like a dog, use my energy and my forcefulness as an advantage, and in a few years, like them, emerge as a forceful leader in the conservative movement in Washington. Doesn't happen overnight, but if anybody who said that they were running for Congress and was going to go up to Washington and be a force on day one, they're lying, and it takes time. And so I'm willing to go up there, put my head down and work like a dog and be a leader in the conservative movement in a few years. That is my bargain to the people of Western North Carolina.
Well, I hope you don't call me a liar, so I will start from day one. Mine are two, and one of them's Paul Ryan because of what he's done, the remarkable way he's really gone after this budget. But the other one, I'll just tell you, he's astounded me ever since he's one of the new recently elected. That's Alan West out of Florida. I can tell you, Alan West is absolutely got a good last name too. That's the only reason I'm running, because I found somebody up there I could really get along with because of his last name. No, he when you see him speak, there's so much passion and so much fight in this man that people, in fact, they're trying to redistrict his area down there in Florida right now. But let me just tell you something, he's going to win because you can't keep a leader down. And he was a leader from day one when he went up there. He was a leader day one. And this is what happens when you have experience. When you go up there with experience to understand that something's got to change. And Alan West went after it. He went up there and supported Paul Ryan's budget. And not only that, he fought for it. And if you can remember, I think I've seen him more on Hannity, and I'm a big Hannity fan. I've seen him more on Hannity than any other congressman up there. Why? Because he's not afraid to stand up for the Constitution and the principles that this country was founded on. That's why I identify with him. Thank you very much.
Now, I'm trusting Mark Meadows told me the right question. The first congressman that I really appreciate would be Joe Wilson. Joe Wilson is my congressman down in South Carolina. That's where I started my company with my father back in 1989. It is still down there. I travel down there. I'm there one night a week, usually to spend the night, take my mother out to dinner. But I've met numerous times with Joe Wilson. He's been out to our company and toured the factory, and I've worked with Joe Wilson. Joe Wilson is a man of a few words, and he has a tough time sitting on them. I would not necessarily burst down in Congress and call somebody a liar, but Joe has my admiration for being one who cannot stand it when something wrong is said, and he stands up to it. Second congressman would be Mike Pence. Mike Pence is he went to the same college I went to up in Indiana. And Mike was an underclassman. Met him at one of the state conventions. Great guy. We stood there and talked for about 15 minutes about where we went to school and what was going on. Mike lost his first time he ran for Congress. I lost my first time I ran for Congress. Mike didn't stop. He started a radio station up in Indiana and broadcast and made himself popular. He had that entrepreneurial ability to see a problem and turn it into an opportunity, which he did. The third person that is not a congressman would be Mitch Daniels. Mitch Daniels is governor of Indiana, and I'm a little partial to Indiana. I like the people up there. But Mitch Daniels toured Indiana. If you know the Mitch Daniels story, he toured Indiana on a Harley, rode the state, campaigned, sleeping on couches of friends and stuff around like that. I ride a Harley. My wife and I rode all 17 counties last fall. We visited with the county managers, putting our jobs plan together. You will see me riding the counties again this spring, come April, when I get my bike back. I'll be the biker from Burke, so watch for me.
And Vance, you can sleep on my couch if you want. As you ask this question, one of the things that you look at is you try to pick people that closely align with your values. And as we look at that, one of the things that Mike Pence is actually a friend of mine. And when I decided to run for Congress, I called him and I said, can one person really make a difference? And what Mike said is, no, one person really can't make a difference, but he says one person with a whole bunch of others coming in as a freshman class, adding to the conservatives that are there, can turn back our country. And he's running for governor now. He's not going to be there, and hopefully he'll be elected to governor of Indiana. But Mike Pence is one of those. And despite Alan West's last name, I would say he would be the other one, Kenny. And in doing that, he has been bold. I think it's wonderful when you can be bold and say what you believe and truly not be ashamed of it. And that's what we need in Congress, for people that are willing to stand up and be held accountable. And if they come back home because of what they say or what they stand for, so be it. We need to stand up for truth, and the truth will always prevail. And so those would be my two. Thanks.
I think the two Congress people would be Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor, and it's because of their emphasis on economics and balancing this budget by shrinking government rather than raising taxes. But I must tell you that in the U.S. Senate, I'm crazy about Jim DeMint. I would say that he and I probably, or I would emulate him in terms of his understanding of the economy. He's got a business background like I do. I have an economics degree from Wake Forest. Economics is my hobby, my passion, and I have a strong business background. So I relate very, very much both with Eric Cantor and Paul Ryan, as well as Jim DeMint. If you want to see how I view the world, I would say it's look at Jim DeMint, and it's pretty much right down the line. There is also a prosecutor who is a congressman from upstate South Carolina whose name is Gowdy, and I think he's right on track in terms of making people in Washington accountable. He holds himself accountable. I hold myself accountable. I have for the 18 years I've represented my constituents as their DA, and I think that's one of the most important things about politics, is to say what you intend to do, and then do it, and then come back to the district and hold yourself accountable to the people who elected you. Thank you.
I've heard some pretty good names up here. I'm not going to try to match them. But my favorite congressmen are all the congressmen who are veterans. And the reason I say that is you can count them on probably that many fingers. And that's one of the reasons why the military is in such big trouble today. If we pay more attention to what we're doing to the military, even if we don't have anybody in it, the military would be a lot better off. And the Congress needs to get its act together when it comes to sending young Americans to fight and die overseas, when they can't even define what the strategy is or why it's important to the rest of us. If I go up there, that's going to change. So I applaud all of them, even though I couldn't name you any of them except Alan West. The other favorite congressman that I have is one that you have already and you don't even know it. It's whichever one of us you vote into office.
question on behalf of somebody that handed me the question, and then we'll have time for 2 more questions before we close shop. This is the question. With education overall being generally a failure during the past 40 years or so in North Carolina, and the U.S., and with the Federal Department of Education largely controlling what is being taught and done in public education, and with the global competition for jobs, and as a result of the failure of public education during the past 50 years, what are your proposals to turn the failure of education into a success? Let's start with you again.
It's a long way over here. There are 3 things that I think we need to do with the money we would save if we revise all of the national entitlement policies to get rid of the payoffs to politicians and do other things to make them more effective in helping Americans to be able to live a better life. Education, infrastructure, and research and development. There aren't 3 more important areas to take the money that we're going to have in the future to redesign our economy and how we're going to do it. And education is the core of all of it. So the policies that have gotten us to a national level education department and taken away authority to make decisions about education from local communities would be the first thing to go if I had anything to say about it. Because everybody knows that the best education systems are the ones whose ideas come from the people who live right next door to the school system. We have to get back to that. But education also needs to be focused on whatever our economy is going to be like in the future. You all would maybe agree with me that we're never going to be the same that we were. We're just going to be better, and we don't know how yet. So part of what we're doing is redesigning the economy, but we have to redesign the education system to make sure that we don't have any more lost generations like the one we have now. The ones whose job, because of NAFTA and CAFTA and everything else, are gone. The ones who don't have time to get education to retool and become something else because they're already 40 or 50 years old. We can't deal with that anymore. We got to have an education system that gets us back to where we need to be competitive in the math and science areas and grounded in the humanities about the history of the world and how we have made it the best place to ever be in the history of the universe.
Ladies, I'm not going to direct this to any of you, but I see some people here who were around in the 70s, like I was, and may remember that in the early 70s, we did not have a U.S. Department of Education. Do you remember that? Can you believe that that's the case? It is. Now, I don't know what good has been accomplished by the U.S. Department of Education. We're fortunate in this state that our schools are not as bad as they are in some of the other states, although they're not great. But I don't see any purpose in not localizing schools. Schools are best run on the local level, and that includes and this is the most important element of that, textbooks. The selection of what's in a textbook is the most critical thing about schools, and yet those decisions are being made in Washington, and I don't know, if you really want to stay awake at night because you can't sleep, go to our schools and take a look at the textbooks and what's being taught in those textbooks. It is a disgrace in some cases. We have great teachers, but I mean, how are you going to teach the right things if it's not in the textbook and you're stuck with that textbook that's been forced on you from Washington? So localized education is the key to that. And I'm really wondering why we have a U.S. Department of Education. So those are some of the points I'd like to make. The last thing is, in terms of our school systems in other states, don't forget there is no basis for allowing public employees to negotiate their labor contracts. Everybody can have an association. That's a constitutional right. But they can't, if they're public employees, they should not be allowed to negotiate their labor contracts. That's that odd thing that has developed. Even Franklin Roosevelt thought that was going to be a terrible thing. And so what do we have in many of our states, fortunately not our state, But that's what's dragged down many of the schools up north, is the fact that they have public employees unionized who can negotiate their contracts. We must avoid that at all costs. Thank you.
We need to make sure that local decisions made by local superintendents, school superintendents, taught by local teachers is where our emphasis is. The Department of Education, if I were to ask many of you, how many times have you gotten a call from the Department of Education to ask how your children or your grandchildren were doing in school? I would say none of you have ever gotten a call from anybody out of Washington, D.C. So I think that the effectiveness of that is truly we need to get rid of it. We need to make sure that we have competition within the school system. You know, when we look at that, we have a great case in point. Hurricane Katrina comes through New Orleans, heavily minority area, and it comes through and wipes out many of the schools. And so what do they come back with? They come back with some charter schools. You know, it's amazing, 87% of those schools were charter schools, and what happened to test scores? Immediately, they started to rise. Now, is that because the teachers were any different? No, it was because we got parents involved, we got local schools involved, and we had decisions made on a local level. So we need to make sure that we do that. Also, as we look at education, we need to make sure that we just don't throw money at it. You know, Senator Davis shared the other night, I heard him speaking, and I was just blown away by this figure, and so I thought I'd share it with you. Eastern Carolina, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, Eastern Carolina University, they have 2 of the top paid people in the state. The chancellor is making $1.2 million. The second person is making $950,000, is that correct?
$1,016,000 for the top one and $950 something for the number 2.
All right, so, and that, that's throwing money at a problem. What we need to do is make sure that we allow local schools and local teachers to make the decision. My wife is a public school teacher. It was many years ago, and I know what I had to do is take money out of our pocket when we didn't have to pay for construction paper to make sure that they got it. That shouldn't happen, especially when we're funding the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
I'm in favor of school choice. Our 4 children went through the public school system down in Burke County, and they turned out fine. But I also support charter schools, private schools, or homeschooling. Now, a lot of people are down on homeschooling, but kids turn out really good when they come out of homeschooling. Do you know that it costs over $20,000 to educate somebody or one of the children up in New York? And I asked a homeschool mother what she figured she spent. She said about $600 a year. Now, who's getting the better education? So that shows you that it is not a matter of money that's the problem. It's the process that we have set up. We had 2 founding fathers that were very big on education and setting up the school system, or advocated for setting it up. Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. They believed that primary school should be to prepare you for life. And that would include math, English, the active languages, things like that. Accounting, to prepare you for the real world. Second level of education would be in the trades, in government, to learn how your government works. This is something we need to reestablish in our school system. That's one of the reasons we've got so many problems with government right now, is nobody knows how the government works, from local government all the way to the national government. And history and geography, we are losing these. You cannot understand why we are where we are if you don't know where we've been. I'm very big on working with trade schools. We should not assume that everybody wants to go to college or needs to go to college. There is so much work to be done on the trade level, and people have a passion to do that. We should not be wasting their time in high school preparing them to go to college when they want to go to the trade schools. Those are good paying jobs, jobs they can be proud of. I've got 2 counties in this district that I traveled around and found that there are not qualified people to fill the jobs of companies that want to come in there. And those companies went away. We've got some serious problems with our education system. And the people in Congress now are not the ones that are going to fix it. Thank you.
I agree with most of what's been said up here. My wife is a special ed teacher out at Hazel High School. My daughter, of course, is a high school teacher too. And there's several things that has to happen. Number one is we've got to get the federal government out of the school business. We need to send everything back to the states and back to the local level. We need to, if there's anything at all we can do, is defund the Department of Education and send it back to the state level, number one. Number two, we need to put discipline back in the schools. Discipline is missing so terribly. The other day, I'll just tell you a story. I walked in, it was really about a month ago. I walked in and I was going in there and Wellman asked me to bring her a sandwich if I was in town. So I was in town, so I was taking my wife a sandwich from the college deli. I walked in there and this young man, probably about the size of Mark, tall person, sat up there. My wife had him pulled down to her eye to eye, 5'1", pulling down a 6'2" person down eye to eye and said, look, you're not going to do this anymore. And what he was doing, he's making obscene gestures and obscene remarks. She sent him up to the principal. Before he got up to the principal, he had time to get on his cell phone and call his mother. His mother had already called the principal before he even made it up there. She just heard the principal heard her side completely. She heard his side. There's got to be some constraints on these kids because we're the ones that's supposed to be taking care of the kids. They're not supposed to be telling us what we can and can't do. And if we do that right there, everybody can come back and have a school. I'm proud to say that Hayesville last year, in fact this last quarter, they had the highest SAT scores in the United States. And I was proud to hear that. So it's because they've got discipline and they do have corporal punishment out there too. Thank you very much.
I'm a big believer in what education can do. I grew up homeschooled. I went to a community college for a couple of years, and then I was very blessed to go to Brown University and got access to all sorts of life opportunities as a consequence. We've got to get education right in this country. Education, I believe, is really long-term economic policy. The way that we run our schools today is going to decide what our economy looks like and our culture looks like 10 and 20 and 30 years from now. And the way that it's being run today, we are not on a good track. I actually think, I'll draw an analogy that I haven't heard anyone mention, but I think is really compelling, which is that education is fast becoming what Barack Obama is trying to also do in the healthcare space, which is they're injecting a bunch of Washington bureaucrats into telling people how to do things. And what's the consequence? Costs go through the roof and quality plummets. And we're seeing that in our public schools, we're seeing that in our higher education systems. We've got to get Washington out of the business of telling us how to do these things. I have a friend who's a teacher who told me about the impact of No Child Left Behind and how it's just made it very difficult for teachers to do what they need to do. And he was telling me about how the way that the standards have ratcheted up every year, his school now needs to get to a 100% pass rate. And he was telling me about one day he was testing his class, and there was a kid there who was just in pieces. He comes from a very bad home, and his mother had just been arrested that morning. And his grandmother was at home. Normally his mother took care of his grandmother at home. His grandmother was at home, disabled and alone. He needed to be at home taking care of his grandmother. He had a horrible situation, but instead he had to be at school taking a test, and gosh darn it, he better pass that test because this teacher is going to get fired if he doesn't. This is the kind of ridiculousness that Washington getting involved in local issues has created. And it's destroying our education system, and we've got to undo it before it undoes our country.
All right, moving along a little longer than I thought. So we've got one more question from the audience. Do I have a question? Raise your hand. Gene, can you stand up?
Realizing it would be a difficult thing to do, but I feel like must get started. What do you feel about the Federal Reserve, which is not federal and it's not reserve? Are you in favor of at least starting some action to eliminate the Federal Reserve?
Spence?
like so many other things in our country, the original intent of the organization, which was essentially to control inflation, has expanded to the point where it's interfering in all kinds of aspects of our financial lives that it was really never chartered to do. And I guess it's one way to look at it is it's just part of the overall process that we're going through to redefine what America is all about in a way that we don't support. And I'm sure the majority of Americans don't support. The financial policies that we have from the Federal Reserve, to me, are contributing to the downfall of our economy. They create uncertainty and instability in the marketplace, which means that entrepreneurs don't know whether they should be putting money into new businesses or expanding businesses. The Federal Reserve has caused more damage than we care to admit. And it's just like the front man is one person. That one person has more authority in this country than anybody should have. I don't think the Federal Reserve should be in the future of the financial system of this country. And I think that system needs to be redefined by us, along with the other priorities that we as Americans in general see as very important to us, always keeping in mind that the strength of America is its economy. And I'm still waiting to see, after 3 years, where it went and when it's coming back.
It's a very sensitive problem. The Fed right now, there's not much we can do until we get out of this recession. We're not going to get out of the recession until we start balancing our budgets. So we've got a couple of years before we can even attack some of the problems with the Fed. When we get back to having a stable economy, because we've started to get control of our deficit spending and started working on our national debt, both of which are unsustainable, and we need to take a look and shine a bright light on the books of the Federal Reserve. Now, if we did that today, we've got to sell our paper across the whole world. And the last thing we need to do is start another run, which is what got us in 2007 into trouble. So it's a very delicate thing, but you and I know that the Constitution never for a second envisioned there to be a Fed. A lot that's being done by the Fed is supposed to be done by the Department of Treasury. The Fed is a problem. It's going to take years to address. There's also an issue about fiat money that's tied in with the Fed. We've got to take a look at perhaps a gradual return to the gold standard, which again has got to be stretched out over years because you can't just get back on gold. So it's an intricate, it's not the subject for today for a 3-minute answer, but it's something that serious people have got to continue to take a look at. It's absurd what they're doing now, buying our own debt. I mean, it's smoke and mirrors right now, but the rest of the world doesn't need to be shown the inner books until we're ready and stable financially. And by the way, we're going to have a double-dip recession. It's already baked into this economy with $4 a gallon gas. Probably right after the November election, it'll nail us. So we've got work to do to lay the groundwork, but the 11th Congressional District Congressman should be well aware of the problems of the Fed. And my gosh, we just rechartered the thing a few years ago, crazy as that is. But yeah, it's something that we've got to take a long view and start pulling in the reins.
Gene, I think your question is are you willing to start the process? And the answer is yes, we need to start the process. You know, when we look at the Fed and being created, I guess in 1913 is when it was actually created, we see that when they start to get active, you know, when I was talking about all those good and bad times economically that we talked about, it had a direct correlation with the activity of the Fed at that particular time, if you really look at it from a monetary policy standpoint. So we need to make sure that we look at that and start to limit that policy. You know, whenever we use the Fed to truly allow the government to get more involved in terms of creating jobs, it doesn't work, it doesn't last, and that's really how we've been using that. The other thing that we've got is I find it just deplorable that the first audit of the Fed was done you know, because of the Dodd-Frank bill recently. So here's what we've got is for almost 100 years, no audit was done. And so then we do an audit, and what do we find? We find $16 trillion that had been spent without any congressional approval. So we're sitting there wrangling our hands over $1 trillion, and should we do stimulus and all that? And we've got the Fed out there spending 16 times that amount of money without any approval. There's something wrong with that. We need to make sure that we have congressional oversight. We need to make sure that we have true audits on a regular basis if it's going to stay in place. And with that is that it looks at the fine-tuned in terms of inflation and not provide economic policy going forward in trying to create jobs with the Fed. Thank you.
You know, I hate to say it, I saw everybody roll their eyes when he started talking about the Fed, you know, because oh my gosh, what are we going to do here? The Fed, as Mark said, was set up in 1913 by J.P. Morgan and Company. And the reason they set this up was because of the panic of 1907. It was a real nasty one where banknotes wouldn't clear, good banknotes, and this was one of a series of panics that had happened. So that's why they set the Fed up. Federal Reserve, it is a central bank, but they didn't want to call it a central bank because nobody wanted that. So they called it nice terms like federal and reserve. What could be nicer than reserve? So, but it was set up and it had no connection with the government, unlike the Central Bank of England. But that changed when World War I hit. And the government required the Federal Reserve to begin buying bonds to support the war effort. That went on, and then after the war, it stopped. But in 1946 or World War II, it started again. Then, in 1946, the Full Employment Act was passed, of course, by the Roosevelt era, packing the courts and all that. The Full Employment Act required the Fed to make sure that we had growth in the economy enough and low interest rates in order to support the economy, and we'd have low unemployment. This is what is plaguing the Fed right now. It is forced by law to keep interest rates low and to pump money into the economy. We need to repeal that 1946 Full Employment Act. The other part, as mentioned, is the audits that need to take place. Now, the Fed is audited by the GAO, but the GAO is not allowed to look at the contracts and the deals between banks or the discount window where money is lent out to banks and also the other countries. That is where the $16 trillion went out, and we don't know anything about it. We need to open that up, bring it into the public view so we can see what the Fed is doing and get it back to a private enterprise and not connected with the government. Thank you.
Well, many people, you know, last time I ran, the whole thing was, well, Kenny, do you support, you know, getting rid of the Federal Reserve? And a lot of people, we would love the idea of going back to the gold standard. We would love it. But what happens right now is when you go back to the gold standard, we've got to realize that there's, with such a debt that we have, back in, the Heritage Foundation found out that back in the year 2010, when there was a $14 trillion debt, if we went back to the gold supply that we have, the known supply would be $236,000 per ounce of gold if we got rid of the Federal Reserve. You know what you would have to carry just to go get a thing of bread? Now, a wheelbarrow full of money. That's why right now that I agree with Jeff and many of the ones that set up here, we can't dismantle it, but what we can do is start controlling it. It's got to fall back into congressional hands. It has to. Why? Because Congress answers to you. That's why. Right now, nobody answers to the Federal Reserve. Does not answer to anybody in this country. Nobody. And they're doing things right now that, frankly, that caused a lot of this recession that we're in right now. They're the ones that loan the money directly to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, bypass the Treasury notes, and cause these people to sit up here and loan money at low rates. And nobody ever questioned them about it. The one thing I will agree with Ron Paul on, and I don't agree with him on a lot of things, is he said we need to audit the Federal Reserve, and we need to do it, and we need to put it back in the congressional hands and work toward, at some point, monetizing it so we can get back to the gold standard. But unless we have in our future, unless we have in the area that we can actually see, hey, look, we can actually start paying it off, like paying off a house note. You get it 30 years, you know by your income, at the end of 30 years it's going to be paying off. We're not seeing that. We're adding to the debt right now. We're not taking away. If we can do that, then at some point I think we can get rid of the Federal Reserve. But right now we need to audit and get it back in the congressional hands. Thank you.
I think the Federal Reserve, it's a tricky topic and it's complicated. But there are a few things that are clear about the Federal Reserve that are problematic. Number one is the way that they have just been gushing money into our economy is setting us up for massive inflation and potentially a very serious economic challenge down the road. And it's completely unchecked. And they've actually pushed liquidity outside of our borders into Europe and other things like that. And it's dangerous the way that they've done it. The other thing that they're doing that troubles me is the way that they're actually buying our U.S. government debt. And so what this is enabling the U.S. government to do, it's enabling Congress and President Obama to continue our addiction to debt without the actual market forces that would prevent us from issuing as much debt as we are. And because the Federal Reserve can just snatch it up at low rates. And so the Federal Reserve and Congress are actually working together to fuel our massive explosion of debt in a way that it's going to get handed off to future generations to pay back. And it's setting us up for destroying our country that much faster. We've got to get that stopped. The other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that the Federal Reserve doesn't become the landing place for agencies that the federal government wants to be untouchable. I think we set a dangerous precedent with the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, by putting it with the Federal Reserve, because it's completely, it's this agency that has the potential to be an incredibly draconian agency in determining how, in terms of making really aggressive regulations. And yet, it's completely off limits. Congress can't do anything about it. We can't let that become the norm for the Federal Reserve. We've got to get it back under control.
All right, before I turn the microphone over to Senator Davis, who I've asked to give the closing remarks rather than myself, I'd like to, on behalf of the Macon County Republican Party, thank all of the candidates for coming here today. I'm very impressed with their knowledge of the issues and their succinct answers. They answered the questions. I didn't see anybody dancing today, and I certainly appreciate that. So with that said, and I'd like to have Senator Davis come up here. Thank you, Senator, and he will close out our forum today. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Nobody asked me, but I'm going to tell you, I am proud to be one of the sponsors of the Defense of Marriage Amendment in North Carolina. And I'll tell you what, it is none of my business, and I don't think it's any of your business to tell people what to do in their bedrooms. However, I am a Bible-believing person, and I believe that we are made in God's image. And I think He made marriage to be between one man and one woman at one time. But you don't have to be Bible-believing to know that. All you have to do is make sure you make it to all your health classes. Marriage is the bedrock of our society. There is no, and I repeat, there is no moral equivalent to traditional marriage in our society. Our government has been subsidizing anti-marriage behavior, traditional marriage behavior, for about the last 40 years, since the Great Society. Ladies and gentlemen, 50% of every white baby born in America is born to a single mother. 70% of every black baby is born to a single mother. If you think that doesn't have ramifications in our educational system, our healthcare system, our law enforcement, our judicial system, you are dead wrong. We are paying incredible prices for that in our society. And I am proud to be a sponsor of that marriage amendment. I want you, and I want you to take everybody that you know to the polls and vote for that. Having said that, the marriage amendment does not, and I repeat, it does not prohibit people of same sex or transgender or whatever else that they are, does not prohibit them from entering into a legal contract that is legally binding. They have that right. but marriage is between one man and one woman at one time. There is no moral equivalent to that, period. I have a couple of things to say about the comments that we've had tonight. Ethan, you said that you were frustrated. Son, I'm old enough to be a grandfather. How do you think I feel? I'm frustrated too. I'm a small business owner, and I'm a lot smaller than I was 5 years ago. And a lot of the reason is because of our government, what the government has done. And I'll also tell you, before I say one last thing, I will gladly pay $5 a gallon for gas from now until November if it means Obama is out of there. I'm going to ask every one of these gentlemen up here in front that at your choice, they hug your neck, kiss you, or shake your hand as they leave, because you are the reason that they have a great opportunity to win this election. You put the Republicans in charge of the North Carolina legislature for the first time in 140 years. They redistricted this district, congressional district, so that a conservative Republican has a great chance of winning, and we will. Thank you very much. Good night.